unconsidered?
Well, Matt, it's not an opinion to say that.
No,
No,
it's perfectly fine for you to say that you think that it was ill-considered, but to say that it was unconsidered
well,
seems a bit
let me
much.
let me touch on something you said. It is not an opinion to remind you and everyone that we were promised a better deal. Remember the promise of the so-called better deal? Of course, that never materialized. That never came close, and in fact, quite the opposite was true. Ever since the last administration left the JCPOA, Iran has been able to gallop forward with its nuclear promise. We were promised that Iran's proxies would be cowed, that Iran would be cowed in submission by the so-called maximum pressure program. Quite the opposite is true, and we continue to see reminders that Iran's proxies have not been subdued, and in fact, quite the opposite. We were told that we'd be in a better position to take on the full set of challenges that Iran poses, whether it's ballistic missiles, whether it is support to terrorism, whether it's human rights violations. How exactly were we supposed to do that when it was the United States and not Iran that was isolated as a result of the decision to abandon a deal and a protocol that was working? That's just the starting point that we had to accept on January 20th of this year. It was an unfortunate starting point, but that's the starting point from which we've been working. Laura.
Thank you. I want to go back to two things that Toria said a few minutes ago. One, she said that Secretary Blinken was on the Hill talking about issues, even what kind of consequence, is this just another reiteration of the fact that they haven't pulled back yet? Is there some kind of red line that or warning that the United States is trying to issue at this point?
I did not take that as a warning. I took it as an observation. It was an observation that we just have not seen the type of de-escalation that we think is necessary if there is to be meaningful progress in the context of the diplomacy and dialogue that's taking place between the Russian Federation, the United States, our allies, and our partners. That's just a fact. Yesterday at the SSD, the Strategic Stability Dialogue, it was about putting ideas on the table. It was not about reaching breakthroughs or coming to any firm agreements. We've been very clear that we will do that only in consultation and only together with our allies and partners. And that's part of the reason why there is a meeting of the NRC tomorrow. There's a meeting of the OSCE Permanent Council on Thursday. So these will be opportunities for the Russians to put their stated concerns on the table, opportunities for the United States and our allies and partners, including Ukraine, in the context of the OSCE, to put our concerns, our collective concerns on the table. We can do that now, but if we are going to have meaningful progress towards these reciprocal measures, that would redound positively on our collective security, our meaning the collective security of the transatlantic community, we will need to see de-escalation. That can't take place in an environment of escalation. And that is why the Undersecretary was just observing that we haven't yet seen that.
And what kind of de-escalation are you looking for? Is it removal of troops? Is it stopping the live fire? Is it removal of helicopters? All the above? More?
I would say yes. The fact is, we talked about this yesterday. Several months ago, there were not 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders. Several months ago, there were not these large-scale live fire exercises. Several months ago, there were not maneuvers with heavy weaponry, with helicopters, the other reports that we've seen in recent weeks and even recent days. All of this, the Russians have done in recent months. They have done so in a manner that was clearly not an attempt to be furtive or stealthy. It's hard to be stealthy when you're moving 100,000 forces along in internationally recognized borders. That underscores and undergirds our concern. And the fact that this was done and is being done in an effort to intimidate and an effort to coerce. And our concern, and Undersecretary Nuland made a reference to this when she spoke about the potential for a false flag operation. Our concern is that the Russians will again resort to the playbook they've resorted to in the past, including in 2014, when they did something very similar. And they amassed troops along Ukraine's borders. They offered specious explanations and justifications that ultimately they pointed to a pretextual purported provocation. They said that the Ukrainians had done this, that, or the other, and that's why they needed to cross the border. That is our concern here. I should say it's one of our concerns here, that the Russians will resort to what has been their playbook, and may still be their playbook. So yes, de-escalation to us would mean many of those things, if not all of those things. It would mean troops returning to their barracks. It would mean transparency around any legitimate exercises that were to take place on Russian soil. We'll be looking for all of those things in the days and weeks ahead if we are in a position to make meaningful progress.
And I'm sorry, the meetings on the Hill by the Secretary, I understand Afghanistan was also on the agenda?
Look, I will leave it to members to speak to these engagements if they want. The point I will make is that we are committed to consulting with members in Hill offices, as the Secretary likes to say, not only on the landing, but on the takeoff and in between. This is a good reminder. We can get you some, I think, really good metrics that speak to the scope and scale of our engagement with Capitol Hill over the past 11 or 12 months here. But we have made coordination and consultation and dialogue with the Hill an absolute priority. We know the important role that the Hill has to play when it comes to oversight, when it comes to foreign policy, and we're committed to that.
I'd love to know the content as opposed to
I'm sure
just
you
the
would.
scope and
I'm
scale.
sure you would.
Can you just enlighten us as to what the date for the status quo ante that you want the Russians to go back to is? Does it go back to 2014, or is Crimea a lost cause for you now? Does de-escalation mean that they have to relinquish control of Crimea?
Crimea, look, we're certainly not saying...
Does it mean that they have to go back to 2008, 2007, and leave Abkhazia and South Ossetia? Where does this de-escalation point start from?
So, Matt, I'm not in a position right here to give you a firm date, but I will tell you that we have been talking about this since about mid-November, for going on 2 months.
So you're basically saying go back to where things were in early November, right? In terms of your troop presence.
We are saying that de-escalation in this context would call for Russian troops to return to their barracks, for these exercises to either be explained or to come to a halt, for this heavy weaponry to return to its regular storage locations. But we are also committed to doing everything we can to support a diplomatic resolution to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. And obviously, of course, Ukraine has demonstrated a commitment to finding a peaceful end to the war. We stand ready to support those efforts, including, as we've heard...
Well, what's the administration doing to back up its demand that Russia get out of Crimea, and to say that the annexation, quote unquote, annexation of Crimea is illegitimate? What are you doing about that, or is that just not an issue in this current
the attempted annexation of Crimea is something that we have responded to since 2014, and there are sanctions in place, and there will be sanctions in place, and there will be measures to hold the Russian Federation to account for its aggression, as long as that aggression persists. Tracy.
On Afghanistan, it's almost 6 months now since the Taliban took over. You just now spoke of the many millions of dollars that the United States is sending in humanitarian aid to the people. But the reports that we get out of Afghanistan are deeply dire and increasingly so, with hundreds of thousands of people starving or on the brink of starvation. What is your best explanation for why that aid is not reaching the people? Is it your refusal to deal with the Taliban? Is it what you mentioned earlier, the Taliban's impeding access of some aid workers? Could you give us an explanation of why that aid isn't helping?
Let me first start what it is not, with what it is not. It is not because of anything the United States is doing or is not doing when it comes to our support for the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. What it is the result of a number of things. It is the result of recent near-term conditions, a drought, winter, of course, now, but also, more to the point, the longer-term trends and conditions that we've seen ossify over the course of nearly 2 decades. And the United States and our partners, we were very clear with the Taliban before before the fall of the previous government in Kabul, that any attempt to overtake the country by force would only worsen what was already a humanitarian emergency. The conditions, the humanitarian challenges we're seeing now, they did not start a month ago. They did not start 2 months ago. They did not start with the fall of previous government. Some of these are structural. As you know, the international community previously provided the lion's share of the public expenditures of the Afghan government. The international community previously provided billions and billions of dollars each year for the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. That latter part is still true. The international community is providing, and the UN today, as you heard, has started a pledge campaign to raise some $5 billion, including about $4.5 billion for the people of Afghanistan and about $500 million for refugees in the region. Now, the United States, as I mentioned before, has been the world's leader in providing that humanitarian assistance, more than $750 million since October of 2020 alone. But we've also encouraged other countries to step up. That remains the case. Other countries, including those in the region, including some of those that may share a border with Afghanistan or that may be in close proximity to Afghanistan, we need to see countries around the world step up, just as the UN called for today, to demonstrate their commitment to the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. It is not in anyone's interest, whether you are a country that is thousands of miles away, like the United States, or you're a country that shares a border with Afghanistan, to see deprivation, to see instability, to see hardship within and among the people of Afghanistan. We've done more than that, however. Beyond our humanitarian leadership, beyond our galvanizing call to action, as you know, the Treasury Department has issued both general and specific licenses to facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid to the people of Afghanistan, to send a very clear signal that not only is the United States government not standing in the way, that we are doing everything we can to call on the international community to do what it can to help the people of Afghanistan. Recently, we supported the release of the so-called ARTF funds of the World Bank, the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Funds, $200 million for the people of Afghanistan. As we've alluded to before, we're looking at other ways, including in conjunction with the UN, that we might be able to support the people of Afghanistan, importantly, in a way that doesn't flow through the coffers of the Taliban.
Do you
Do you have a
do you have
follow-up?
metrics to show, though, you like to talk about metrics, to show that money, or aid, I mean, is getting to the people? I mean, how do you measure that?
Well, it is,
Substantiate.
as you know, it is more complex in the in the context of Afghanistan, because it cannot flow through the coffers of the Taliban. And so the United States and our partners were reliant on primarily on our NGO partners on the ground to dispense with these humanitarian funds. We are regularly in contact with these humanitarian partners. They continue to operate on the ground. They continue to implement programs from winterization to healthcare to nutrition to education. And so we are regularly in touch with them, and they are in a position to offer reports on that progress. Kylie.
We are hearing that the evacuation flights are still grounded. It's been about a month now. We're also hearing there are about 80 Americans still in Afghanistan who would like to leave. So when was the last evacuation flight that left Afghanistan, and are those two things accurate, that they're still grounded and there are about 80 Americans who want to leave?
Well, let me just give you some context. As you know, we made clear prior to August 31st that our commitment to U.S. citizens, to lawful permanent residents, to Afghans to whom we have a special commitment would not end on any date certain and not on August 31st. And since August 31st, 479, we have directly assisted the departure of 479 U.S. citizens and 450 lawful permanent residents. There are others whose departure we have indirectly helped or supported in various ways. We are working currently with a few dozen U.S. citizens and their families who have identified themselves as prepared to depart and who have the necessary travel documents to do so. We believe at this point that in addition to those few dozen U.S. citizens and their families, there is a relatively small number, probably fewer than 200, again, with all the caveats that apply to these numbers fluctuating. But we're in touch with about 150 other U.S. citizens who don't want to leave Afghanistan at this point or otherwise not ready to depart. We've worked very closely, as you know, with our partners, including the Qataris, on these relocation efforts. We have a team here at the Department of State that is dedicated to this mission around the clock. And again, our commitment to any American citizen who may or may not be ready, who may or may not wish to leave, is that if he or she and their family wish to leave and they're ready to leave, we will be there to assist them.
Sorry, when was the last evacuation flight?
I don't have that available now, but again, our commitment to Americans is sacrosanct, and we're continuing to work very closely, not only with them, but also with our partners, including the Qataris, with whom we've worked on these relocation flights.
Is it problematic that these evacuation flights have been halted for so long?
Again, I think you can look at our track record and the fact that we have relocated more than 900 U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, not to mention a significant number of other Afghans who meet the criteria for relocation, I think speaks to not only the commitment, but also the ability that we have to relocate Americans and those to whom we have a commitment.
The Afghans?
It was, as of a couple weeks ago, it was in the ballpark of a couple thousand. Saeed.
Thank you. Switching gears to the Palestinian issue. Ned, there are Israeli reports that they are headed towards evicting more Palestinians or evicting Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah and from Silwan, despite your repeated calls on the Israelis not to do so. What can you do to sort of persuade them not to actually go ahead with this action?
Saeed, on the general issue, we've been very clear that it is critical for Israel and the Palestinian Authority to refrain from unilateral steps that exacerbate tensions or might otherwise
Ned,
undercut efforts to.
But the Palestinian Authority does not evict any Israelis. I mean, this is really just.
But if you let me finish, we have been very clear that it's incumbent on both Israelis, on Israel and the Palestinian Authority to refrain from unilateral steps. In this case, we have been clear that steps that exacerbate tensions and undercut efforts to advance negotiated two-state solution would include the eviction of families from homes in East Jerusalem, in which these families have lived for generations in some cases. We've been very clear about that.
But obviously the Israelis are not listening to you. What would you do to make them, to sort of persuade them that they should not do that?
Saeed, we continue to discuss this with our Israeli partners. We've been very clear in our public statements as well, but there are ongoing discussions about this.
Very quickly, a federal judge last Friday ruled that a law targeting the PLO being unconstitutional. Would that lead you to sort of reopen the PLO office here in Washington?
For any question,
could that lead to the reopening of the office?
Well, for any questions about litigation or the implications of litigation, including the fold litigation, I would need to refer you to the Department of Justice. When it comes to the Palestinian office, I just don't have an update to offer at this time, but you've heard us say that as a general matter, this administration is committed to and actively engaged with the Palestinians. Over the course of the last few months, we've had numerous high-level meetings with Palestinian officials. Of course, Secretary Blinken was in Ramallah mid last year. Ambassador Lynn Thomas Greenfield and Undersecretary Nuland were there in November as well. Our acting assistant secretary Yael Limpert accompanied National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and met with senior Palestinian officials in December. Yes, sir.
If I may return to Ukraine very shortly, tomorrow during NATO-Russia Council, we will definitely hear one more time the demand that Ukraine will never become a member of NATO. There were a lot of statements, for example, from Deputy Secretary Sherman, who told that we will not allow anyone to slam closed NATO open door policy. But could you clarify the American position? Does it mean that this issue is undiscussable, it's totally off the table, or it might be discussed tomorrow during the council?
The point of dialogue is that, of course, any country is able to put on the table a concern that country may have. But the point of dialogue is for the other countries to be very clear. And we've been very clear that NATO's open door policy for us is not something, and for the alliance, is not something that is on the table. It is a fundamental pillar of the North Atlantic Charter. It is a fundamental pillar of what it is to be the defensive alliance that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So yes, it is in that sense specific to NATO, but, and we've talked about this yesterday as well, it's also bigger than NATO. It's bigger than any alliance. It's bigger than any collection of countries. It's about the basic fundamental tenet that no country can dictate the foreign policy, the decisions, the aspirations of any other country. No country can override international borders. No country should be in a position to threaten, to intimidate, to coerce any other country. And so that is the basic principle that Russia's so-called demands have brought into sharp relief. Definitely.
On Kazakh President Tokayev says the CSTO mission is going to start winding down and that it has helped put down an attempted coup d'etat. What is your assessment of that explanation, and does it satisfy the concerns the U.S. had about the deployment of the troops?
Well, we do welcome the reports of calm in the city of Almaty that we've heard in recent hours and over the course of the past day. We also welcome President Tokayev's announcement that the CSTO collective peacekeeping forces have completed their mission. Until that process is completed and until the CSTO peacekeeping forces are withdrawn, we'll continue to call upon all collective security treaty organization, collective peacekeeping forces to respect international human rights and to uphold their commitment to promptly depart Kazakhstan as the government of Kazakhstan has requested. With Kazakhstan's constitutional institutions in place, we are hopeful this situation can be resolved peacefully. Final question, yes.
On Afghanistan, there are reports, foreign policy reported that the Taliban have begun to replace diplomats who refuse Taliban rules, threatening them of violence and such things. So are you aware of these reports, and how do you comment?
I will, I'm not in a position to confirm these reports when it comes to the makeup of any sort of Taliban delegation. I would need to, I don't have a comment on that. But what we have said repeatedly and what the international community has made clear is that it is incumbent on the Taliban to form and to put together a potential future government that is inclusive, that is representative not only of the Afghan people, but that is responsive to the needs of the Afghan people. And we've spoken to the scale and the scope of those needs. They're tremendous, and that is why it's especially important that in order for the Taliban to earn the legitimacy that they seek, that that any future government in Afghanistan is inclusive, it's representative of the people of Afghanistan, it's responsive to their needs. And that's what we, together with our allies and partners, will be watching very closely.
On Sudan, are you considering restarting the assistance plan, and are you going to nominate an ambassador?
So I don't have an update for you on any nominations that may be forthcoming. When it comes to the assistance that was suspended in the aftermath of the October 25th actions that the military undertook, we're determining the best course and looking at how we can most effectively support the democratic aspirations of the people of Sudan. It's very clear from their actions over recent months that the people of Sudan still believe in the democratic revolution that swept over the country, their aspirations for democracy, for human rights, for dignity, and for self-determination remains, and the United States will continue to be a partner to them in those aspirations.
One final question,
Yes.
if I may. Also, there are reports that Biden administration expressed reservation over the East Med pipeline. Can you confirm that?
I'm sorry, reservations over?
East Med pipeline.
I don't have a reaction to that. If we have anything to share, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.